Yes. Okay, perfect.
Not touch.
No touch, okay. Yeah, sorry for that. Okay, colleagues, I think we can get started. Welcome to everyone. Good to see many faces, familiar ones and new ones. I'm Sönke Kreft. I lead the MCI, the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, and I'm also co-leading the Risk and Adaptation Department at the United Nations University, Institute for Environment and Human Security. And I have the pleasure to do the opening to today's session, which is called Bridging the Finance Gap of NAPS with Climate and Disaster Risk Finance. And I will explain a little bit of the background and why we choose this session and what we intend to do over the next 1.5 hours or so. So you all know, last year with the global stocktake decision, parties actually agreed that all developing countries will have to have NAPs by the year 2025. And these NAPs will have to be implemented. That's in the decision on the global goal on adaptation. Will have to be implemented until 2030. And so I think there's a real momentum. But those of us that have worked in the field also know the formulation of the NAP is only the beginning of a journey. And this is a little bit what we try to look at also in today's session, and really to unpack also the hard part of implementation and making NAPs actionable. At MCI, we've done a collaboration together with UNDP to develop supplementary guidelines to look at climate and disaster risk finance. That's our field. So also how risk finance and insurance is working, and to implement that and incorporate that into the NAP process. But by doing so, we actually discovered many questions are related to making NAPs actionable. So what we want to do today is have the specific example of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, but with that specific example, go through some of the common and general challenges that exist in making NAPs more actionable. We've laid out the session in the following way. So we will have also a welcome by my dear colleague Ashala, Director of Investment Service at the Green Climate Fund. Super to have you here to also get the views of the GCF. The GCF is one of the main actors in actually bringing NAP to reality, and would be really interesting to send us off on a good conversation and good work. Then we are going to do a brief presentation on the NAP process itself, as well as on climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, to cover the basis and get us on the same page. And then we want to do an interactive World Cafe discussion with you. We have different tables. We'll look into the formulation phase of NAPs, and we will also look into the implementation phase. By that, also co-creating the exercise that we've done in the past year or so to look at how to make NAPs more actionable, how to include climate and disaster risk finance in the different steps that NAP formulation and implementation entails. And then we have a short joint discussion, and then off everyone goes. Good. And with that, Achala, I would quickly ask you to give the view of the GCF.
Thank you, Sanke. One of my very good friends and long-term friends in this whole process. Thank you to MCI for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Achala Singh. I am one of the very new directors at the GCF. You may have heard that GCF and our new executive director, Mafalda, is going through a massive restructuring. We have done the restructuring, and we are improving, changing, really looking at how to deliver our work fast and at scale. Today is the Climate Finance Day, and I am glad that Sönke put the context of this session in the 2 words, actionable NAPs, actionable national adaptation plans. I will be here for the 2 weeks, and there are so many invitations to speak at these sessions representing GCF. And in my calendar, I have 14 events to speak at, and most of them are on national adaptation plans. And that shows how much importance that we are giving to adaptation and how much importance that we are giving to finance, because the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, is the largest climate fund, and we have a commitment in terms of our financing. We have a commitment to dedicate 50% of our funding to adaptation. And out of those 50%, that 50% needs to also go to 50% of adaptation funding. Out of that 50% needs to go to least developed countries, small island developing countries, and countries in Africa. So GCF is bringing in quite a comprehensive package to support national adaptation plan. One of the tools that we have introduced and we have been implementing is called our Readiness and Preparatory Support Program. Before we have now a new strategy for our Readiness and Preparatory Support Program, where the NAPs are mainly, NAP support is mainly housed. But before I go to that, I want to say that the NAP process has been going on for a while. So I'm actually a bit surprised when I saw the guidance in terms of, working towards implementing those NAPs by 2030. I think we have to really think about the urgency and the vulnerabilities that we are facing in our countries. I think these timelines really don't matter when it comes to what needs to be done on the ground today, or we must have done yesterday. This morning I spoke at an event that focused on one of our very, very innovative projects that we approved 2 weeks ago, called Barbados Barbados Debt Swap Conversion for Resilience Building. And the reason why I want to mention this is because there is this whole need, massive need of bringing in finance in an innovative way to address the adaptation and resilience needs of our countries. If you haven't seen this project, I encourage you to please have a look at this. This one is one of the most innovative projects that the GCF board has approved to date. And it really brings in the MDBs, the concessional financing from the Green Climate Fund and the private sector, as well as the leadership and the guidance from Her Excellency Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados government, in a very, very nice manner. Now, let me go to very briefly to say what we are seeing through the GCF portfolio of supporting national adaptation plans. What are we seeing and what information that we have gathered so far? I was the legal and strategic advisor to the Least Developed Countries Group for 10 years, from 2009 to 2019 in the UNFCCC process. So I'm perhaps nicely aware of the whole NAP process and how it came about and how it was incorporated into the Paris Agreement as well. And I do understand the significance of the national adaptation plans and how, if done well, how it could actually set the direction of travel in terms of long-term planning for the country when it comes to adaptation and resilience. And what we are also seeing is that the NAP planning, the NAP process itself provides a basis for very proactive rather than reactive adaptation planning by identifying high-risk areas and promoting preventive actions in our countries. There are, however, it's not a perfect tool, or the tool, perhaps the concept of it is perfect, but in terms of actual preparation and implementation, there are quite a lot that we could do at our countries. The main areas that we are looking at and our countries are looking at is related to adequate resources in implementing national adaptation plans. 2 days ago, I spoke at the least developed countries expert group event on national adaptation plans, and there was a on-the-spot survey, and the LDC group expert group chair asked a question: what are the most important needs in terms of preparing NAPs by 2025 and to have progress in implementing them by 2030, and the responses, the vast majority of responses were around the resources that are necessary for countries, and the need for all partners to come together. And in terms of resources, it went into the details of financial resources that's necessary for countries. We have also seen the need for more collaboration between the government, private sector and civil society to ensure NAPs are inclusive and also address diverse needs, and then also enhance access to reliable climate data and impact studies. There is also this whole discussion is around risks and insurance, and there is that need in terms of integrating disaster risk finance strategies into national adaptation plans as well. And I think Sonke and the team are going to talk about this in a minute. I want to very briefly mention about the GCF. Specific tools that we have in terms of countries accessing funding from the GCF. We are the biggest technical assistance fund when it comes to climate action. We have this very specific pot called Climate Readiness and Preparatory Support Program. And in that, the new strategy of the Readiness and Preparatory Support Program, we provide targeted support to countries in developing national adaptation plans, and also support countries through that process, identify climate vulnerabilities, develop effective adaptation strategies, and integrate climate resilience into national as well as subnational and sectoral planning processes. Our support to NAP constitute 40% of our overall readiness portfolio. That includes 112 grants to date, with around $250 million benefiting 101 countries. And the NAP support to small island developing states and LDCs constitutes $121 million support provided to 50 countries. And with this support, 58 countries have reported the development and updating of national adaptation plans as of June 2024. And the subnational and sectoral level, 49 countries are focusing on the development and update of subnational and sectoral plans. The new readiness strategy now allows the countries, the ministries, to directly access funding without having an intermediary delivery partner. So for example, the previous session here was on how to bring the Ministries of Finance and Ministry of Environment together to have impactful NAPs and implement them. And we encourage the governments to think how you access the readiness funding. We have $7 million per country for more cohesive planning for the period of 2024 to 2027. So the readiness funding that we gave under the previous strategy had a ceiling for annual funding, right? Every year the country has to access funding. We have changed that now. We have a 7 million pot per country, 4 million for general readiness, and that includes, so 30% of that 4 million has to go to government coordination, capacity strengthening. 60% of that 4 million we would like the governments to countries to use for impactful pipeline development, and 10% for knowledge. That's the 4 million pot. And there is another 3 million pot. That's how you come to the 7 million pot. The 3 million pot is for specifically for NAPs. National preparation, National Adaptation Plan preparation. If the country has already prepared the National Adaptation Plan with other funding or previous GCF funding, now the country can access these 3 million to implement the National Adaptation Plan. So that's how we have changed. As I mentioned, the governments, the Ministry of Finance or the relevant ministry can directly access funding as long as they go through our financial management capacity assessment, which means they have to prove that they can manage the financing received from GCF. The governments can directly access funding. We have also heard that for most of the NAP preparation, there has been this fly-in, fly-out consultancies. The governments don't own the NAP, and therefore there is an issue when it comes to implementation. The countries can also request for we call them placement, an expert that the government recognize to be placed in the ministry using GCF funding. And for LDCs and SIDS, we have allocated $320,000 for that purpose. And that person, expert, we encourage that person to be a national expert and can be hand-holding the government ministries as necessary and be the bridge between the GCF and the government. So these are the readiness funding that's available, but you also know that we have to date we have projects that's worth $16 billion that are in approved projects, and 50% of that has gone to adaptation projects. And the current GCF period, we call it GCF2. Under our updated strategic plan, we have $13 billion and the funding pot is increasing under the executive director's leadership. That's the we have a strategy called 50 by 30, which means $50 billion altogether by 2030. And as I mentioned, and I keep mentioning, 50% of that funding to go to adaptation. What we haven't seen much, and we would like to see much, is the plan of National Adaptation Plan really being converted to programs and projects, implementable, actionable projects and programs. This, I hope, under these kind of discussions, we see more in the coming years, and the countries access funding from GCF for implementing those projects and programs. With that, I'm going to hand over to Sanke again. Very happy to answer any questions you may have. My department, I lead the department that is responsible for readiness accreditation and our project preparation facility. So feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions, and I will be very happy to answer those. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Achala, bringing forward also the views of the GCF and also explaining the changes that happened. I would now hand over, I know you have to leave at 12, so feel free, and we keep open the dialogue, and we'll report back on the outcomes of the discussions afterwards. With that, I would ask my colleague, Serene O, to quickly guide us to the NAP process to get us started.
Thank you, Zonke, and thank you, Antala, for your great opening remarks. I think that really emphasized how NAP is important and how GCF is more developing better modalities for national adaptation plan. So today I'll just briefly introduce about what national adaptation plan. I assume that everyone knows about what NAP is, but I will just give more overview about what we are doing. So maybe we can touch over climate adaptation first, which is taking actions to prepare and adjust to climate risks and climate change in general. And here I want to emphasize the finance gap in national adaptation plan and adaptation actions in general, because it has very huge finance gap compared to mitigation. So we have $194 to $366 billion per year, which is a huge amount of money. And that's why the adaptation needs to be more well-planned and cost-effective. So national adaptation plan is more or less a roadmap for the countries to reduce their vulnerabilities and build more resilience to climate change. So basically it has two functions, so you can reduce vulnerability so that you can address more climate change effectively. And secondly, you can facilitate the integration of climate change in climate adaptation actions into your national policies. It's not only about the policy level, but programs and also activities. So as of 2024, 59 countries submitted national adaptation plan, and 22 of them are LDCs and 13 countries all SIDS. So this is like a general overview of adaptation cycle. So I think the texts are a bit small, so maybe I can just briefly cover. So first you have to assess the impact and vulnerability of the climate change of your country, and then you can plan what would be the adaptation actions, and then you can put this into actions, so like you can basically implement the policies or programs. And after that, you have to monitor and evaluate whether the actions have been taken. And on the right side, there's a general overview of NAP process, but in the center of it, they mention some enabling factors, which I hope you guys learn a bit more. So it will be financing and also leadership, skills, and overall capacity aspects that you have to build to implement NAP in a better way. So this is also described in UNFCCC's guideline. So there's a NAP guideline which was developed in 2012. But just to give you like an overview of process, it's pretty straightforward. So first you have to identify and lay the groundwork, and then you have to prepare what elements should be included. And you have to build the implementation strategies, which we'll also cover in this session. And lastly, you have to report, monitor, and review your actions. So I just introduced the process of NAP, but the thing is that it looks very straightforward, but putting into actions would be way more difficult and challenging. So there are some concerns regarding implementing NAP collected from many stakeholders. So this was collected during last SB. So there are some challenges we have been facing, such as moving forward from formulation to implementation, which is also covered in Anchala's opening remark. It's difficult to plan the national adaptation plan, but it's more challenging to put that into like real implementation. And also there are like limited funding, which is also covered in the beginning of the presentation. And also we don't have enough capacity because all the developing countries don't have enough capital and also enough knowledge in terms of climate adaptation. And it's also very challenging to implement in like a different levels of government because many ministries are involving and many private sector and public institutions have to implement the NEP together. And lastly, it takes long to get funded to implement NEP or formulate NEP. So these are the main challenges that National Adaptation Plan and related stakeholders are facing at the moment. But I want to emphasize why national adaptation is important, especially in this COP onwards. During the first global stocktake and global goal on adaptation, there's significant emphasis and highlights on like we need to move forward the national adaptation and expedite the process. So by 2025, we have to put in like national adaptation plans in place. It's not only about developing countries, but it also includes developed countries. So it's not a matter of if you're from Global South or North, but it's a matter of for every country and everyone. And if you look at the third bullet, by 2030, you have to assess the climate impacts, vulnerabilities, and risks. And the progress and implementation of the NEP should be started by 2030, which means that we have to start right now so that we can see some results and tangible outcomes by 2030. So I think this pretty much summarizes the overview of National Adaptation Plan. So we can move on to climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. I'm pretty sure it would be a bit more unique and new for the audiences. And this would be delivered by our expert, Magdalena Miwet, a project manager of UNU.
Hi, and also good morning from my side. The session title was National Adaptation Plans and CDRFI, Climate and Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance. As you know, in the climate space, we like very long names and even more longer acronyms. The discussion that we're going to have is not focusing specifically on disaster risk finance, but since we are expert on this, whenever we bring up examples, usually it's from the space. After all, we're called Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. So I just want to give you a very brief overview about what this is, so you're later not confused when it comes up in the discussion. So basically, CDRFI refers to any financial instrument or strategy that aims to improve financial preparedness and resilience of individuals against climate and natural hazards. And what we want is after disaster, we all know what we need. We need money and we need it quick, right? So this is why we try to pre-arrange as much as possible. So once the disaster hits, we get these financial resources to the people who need it most, but it can be governments, businesses, individuals, so they can actually act and address their losses and damages. And like this, we also try to prevent people from going, for example, into further debt and protect their livelihoods and the development. Now, disaster risk finance is part of the disaster risk management cycle. I want to stress that all of these points are very important. We really want to adapt and reduce the risk as much as possible because this is always cheaper, right? Insurance and associated mechanisms, they are quite costly, they are necessary, but they are one part of the package, right? So first you assess your risk, very similar to adaptation cycle, then you reduce it as much as you can, you prepare for the worst case, the risk that you couldn't reduce, this you try and manage it, either by giving it to the insurer or to keep it within yourself. With this risk retention, you can prepare some budgets, for example. Then disasters will inevitably hit at some point, and then you are prepared so you can recover, hopefully quickly and more resilient. Now, there's a lot of different tools when it comes to disaster risk finance. I'm not going to go into detail with all of this. There's credit lines, there's insurance, there's budget reallocation, but also like humanitarian funds. And what I want to say is that you need to combine them in a strategic way. and this is called risk layering. So one single tool is not going to cut it, although already having one tool is pretty good, but it's not enough, so you need to kind of put them together in a menu depending on your needs. And now you think, should I put this in the adaptation plan? Is this not like loss and damage? Is this now going together or what? So we came up with this concept where we want to show that disaster risk finance is sort of at the end of adaptation, right? Adaptation is risk reduction, but then if you don't secure your adaptation investment, is not going to be very cost efficient, right? So you have an infrastructure measure, for example, it gets destroyed. If you didn't prepare for this financially, well, you are still not adapted, right? So it's the last step of adaptation and the first step of addressing loss and damage. And there's several different benefits of disaster risk finance for adaptation. One, the most obvious, is that you have this, what I already said, you have very quick financial resources when you really need it most, and you can also de-risk investments. This is very important, right? We have adaptation, finance gap. We always say private sector needs to come in, but the private sector for them sometimes is very risky to do this sort of investments. So we always talk about de-risking. Insurance is one that comes up very often. What else do we have? Disaster risk finance in its nature already brings different stakeholder groups together. Just like today, I see party negotiators, I see some civil society organizations. We are from academia. So this is sort of the magic of insurance, to bring us all together and work, and the private sector, of course, to bring us all towards this common good of protection. But I don't want to be talking too much now about disaster risk finance, because we have been instructed that this must be an interactive session. So this is what's going to come now. Before I go into the instructions, I want to tell you that if you attend several of these academy sessions, I think, you will get a certificate. You will get the certificate if you scan the QR code on the door. So before you leave, don't forget to scan the QR code, because who doesn't like a nice certificate, right? All right, but now we shall stop the lecture part. We are still pretty on time, I'm impressed. So what we have is we have a World Café. World Café means that you write on paper on the tables, and then after 20 minutes, you're gonna stand up to prevent you from falling asleep and go to the next table and continue the work, right? And what we're gonna work on is actionable and investable NAPs, and whenever we have some examples, we talk about disaster risk finance. Basically, we have 2 tables, but we have 4 tables because there might be a lot of you. So we have 2 on the formulation phase and 2 on the implementation phase. Now, some of you are going to start with implementation. Then you just imagine, I just wrote the best and most implementable NAP, but now how am I going to get to finance? And the one who starts with formulation, where you basically start from 0, right? So you are one of the, I think, 8 LDCs that haven't submitted an NAP yet. We are 4 moderators. We are going to guide you. We also have like some pre-cut steps, so there's no blank paper and there's no awkward silence. And then after 20 minutes, you change the table, we discuss a bit more in depth, and then after in the end, we wrap up, and hopefully you learn something. So now I want all of you who are here to do this exercise. I understand some people might be here to work or something, so then it's fine, but then don't sit at the table, sit here. So please, the ones who want to participate, get up and sit at this, or this table. Off you go. Hey everybody, now is the bad time of the World Café, is when you have to move the table. I know people are actually having good conversations, but the time is running. So you guys should get up and this table move here and the other way around, please. Thank you. Hello, everybody. We have already reached the end of the session, actually. We have 2 minutes to go. I think we can do like 2 or 3 minutes over time. I have lost my clicker. Could we go to the next slide, please? All right. So we were discussing, some used the paper, some didn't use the paper. There's the clicker. Thank you. In the end, we were discussing along guidelines that we are developing for UNDP. It's going to be supplementary guidelines how to integrate disaster risk finance into national adaptation plans. These should be published hopefully in the first quarter of next year. So you can check UNDP website. This is sort of the preliminary summary of these guidelines. But also I got really good feedback here, so I might also still adjust them. And yes, so you can have basically the key takeaways are these main steps. In my desk, I was really stressing risk modeling, forward risk modeling, and quantification, cost-benefit analysis. If you invest in the beginning, it will pay off later because you have a business case to go to the GCF, to go to other funders and be like, this is what it costs, this is what it prevents, and this is why you should do it. But now I'm going to give the mic to every table. I'm going to pick some poor people to give me like one thought, what you learned, what you remember. Here you go.
What I remembered from that.
One thing that stood out to you.
One thing that came out for us is indeed on the long-term investment. So how to model it and how to really make the business case to make that possible. We were talking about the health and the water sector and how to do that vis-a-vis national adaptation plans and how to bring that in. So we were talking about the challenges and the possibilities there. And one was from my colleague, how do national adaptation plans, how do they relate to the NDC process and how can we bring them together and make the case?
Thank you very much. So a lot of NDCs have an adaptation component. There was an analysis done that found that I think 65% are only slightly aligned. There were very few that were really aligned, and there are some that are not at all aligned. So I think this is a gap that we should address because it also means unnecessary double reporting towards different goals. So I think the NAP, once we did it, can definitely feed into the adaptation component of the NDC. And yes, for long-term investment. Thank you. I will pick another poor soul, which is going to be...
Thank you very much. I learned about the steps for the NAPs, whereby there are institutional frameworks and also the legal mandate for the adaptation. Those are the two that I managed to pick from those steps.
Great, thank you very much. I'm gonna pick another one. Who am I going to pick? You.
Sorry? sorry.
Maybe not you, because you were busy. Can I ask you one takeaway that you take from the session? One thing that you remember?
It's about it's about the stakeholder consultations.
Yes. So we were discussing when to consult stakeholders. So in the cards, we put it for the formulation twice. But actually what we found is that this should be in the cross-cutting. Like you shouldn't just do like an intervention here, an intervention there, but really with most of the steps that you do, really always go back to your group, and the more often they're consulted, the greater is also going to be the ownership and the usefulness of this exercise. And then one more, here you go.
We ended up not talking as much about formulation at this table, but we talked about some of the ways that you can do like probabilistic modeling of some of the like unique assets in a country, looking at the ways that the intensity and frequency can impact the ways that you treat and react to this.
Thank you very much. We all touched on risk modeling at UNU. We also do probabilistic risk modeling, and my colleague Alvaro here, in case you have questions, you want to talk more about this, he is happy to give you your card and discuss this. And with this, I would like already to close. Thank you so much for taking part of the session. We enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too. Please also give us feedback. It's the first time we do this academy. The academy is also, I think, a new process. So, and this is the first session, so congrats, you're really the front runners here. Don't forget to scan this QR code, and if you have any questions, please shoot us an email, and I hope I'm going to see you guys around. Bye-bye.